start off with some hard facts. We think we're in the midst of the sixth mass extinction crisis. And it's not affecting everything equally. The tropics are hit harder. We're losing more species there than anywhere else. And we're losing certain groups. We're losing amphibians particularly. You may already know these facts, and you may be saying to yourself, yes, I know, but do I have to care? There's a lot of other stuff going on right now. This may be new to you, but you say, but that's bad, but what can I do? I'm not a scientist. I don't make the decisions. So today I want to talk to you about how we can change that narrative to, yes, you should care, and yes, there are things you can do, but in order to understand why we are currently not able to address this crisis, we need to first talk about the factors that are contributing, and we need to talk about what our role as humans is on this planet. So those of you that have already heard about the amphibian extinction crisis are a small select group. Most of you, if you know anything about what's going on, you know about the big things. You might be aware that elephants are endangered, or that polar bears are starving, or that rhinos are almost extinct, or that pandas are in decline. And the reason that you know about these is because these are what we call charismatic megafauna. Mega means big. These are big things. These are things that are so big we can't miss them. They're so big we know where they live. We know how many there are. We can count them over decades so we can see the declines. And if it gets bad enough, we've watched them well enough that we can take them into captivity, and in a zoo, we can try to preserve a species. We may not have all the tools we want, but for big things, we're on our way. For little things, we don't have those tools. For little things like frogs, we're finding new species all the time, but we don't even know what our diversity looks like. Frogs are one of the hardest hit groups in this extinction crisis. Amphibians in general are losing over 40%. 40% are in decline. If you have a representation of the diversity today, what that looks like is a critical loss. Now, I'm going to talk about this amphibian extinction crisis, but as I said, it's part of the sixth extinction, and this is not just amphibians, this is life on Earth. It's the sixth mass extinction event because there have already been 5 others, the kind of big 5 when we've had a critical loss of biological diversity on Earth. These range from about 75% of species going extinct at a time up to 95 or 96%. The end Permian extinction event is known as the Great Dying, when life almost went out on Earth. 4% of species made it through. We're in the Anthropocene. We don't know what this extinction event looks like. We don't know if it's going to be as bad as these, or if it's going to be more like the multitude of other extinction events we've had on our climate, or on our Earth in these past millions and millions of years. But what we do know is species are declining all over, and we need to do something now. Now, this is about amphibians, and whether amphibians will make it through, and what we can do for them in particular. But we should remember that amphibians actually have been around since the end of the Devonian. They've survived most of these extinction events. But the diversity of life that we had during those different times was so different from today. When only 4% of species make it through, you lose so much of what life is like. Now, this is a talk about conservation biology, but I'm not originally trained as a conservation biologist. I'm an evolutionary biologist. My plan was to go to tropical ecosystems and study the little tiny frogs that live there. And an evolutionary biologist looks to the past. My idea was to look at all the species today, where they are, how many, and back calculate the past few million years for their evolution. But when I showed up at the forest where I was trying to study my frogs, where they were 10, 20 years ago, I'd find they weren't there. This is a picture of what it looks like when a forest, the dark area, is entirely removed, except for tiny, tiny fragments. In the tropics, where the diversity is so great, we cannot do this kind of the kind of conservation we need to understand what we have today and what we could have tomorrow. The reason we're so unable to even move forward with conservation in the tropics is due to global inequalities. Some of them are natural and some of them are human-induced. So the first global inequality is a natural one. This is the latitudinal biodiversity species gradient. This just means that there are more species in the tropics than there are more towards the poles. So red means a lot of species are there, and the cooler blues and greens are where there's not many species. Cincinnati is blue. We're a temperate ecosystem. We don't have a lot of species. If you don't have a lot of species, not a lot of species can go extinct. In the tropics, we have a lot of species, so that's where these extinctions are happening. This is mammals. These are amphibians. Amphibians show the same pattern where the biological diversity is in the tropics. Keep that in mind when you look at this map. This is where the scientists are. And as you can see, the scientists are not in the tropics. If you look at science spending, it is also not in the tropics. This inverse relationship leads to a mismatch in our need and our resources to combat that need for conservation. So this bigger figure is just the number of scientists on the y-axis and the research spending on the x-axis. And the tropical countries are down in the corner. Those are those little greens and yellow tiny dots. And as you go up in the graph, you go towards those temperate northern countries. This is Eurasia and this is North American. That's where the money is. Overlay that biodiversity and you see the problem. When you have that kind of problem, when you have a lot of species and you don't have a lot of scientists and you don't have a lot of funding, you end up with data deficient species. This may not be something you've ever heard of before. So the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the IUCN, categorizes all the species on Earth. Any species we know about has a risk of extinction. It ranges from least concern, which is your white-tailed deer, they are not going extinct, to threatened, endangered, and extinct. And if you have a category, you can make a plan. But in the tropics, where we describe dozens of species new to science every year, a huge percent of them are data deficient. That means we don't know what category they should go in because we don't know anything about them. We don't know if they're threatened because we don't actually know how special they are. We don't know how many there are, how broad their range is, or if they're declining. If we add in those data deficient species to that original map of the frog diversity, what you would find as we describe all these new species is we have more than we thought, right? So that's good, more biological diversity. Except data deficient species tend to go extinct faster because they tend to be rare. They're the ones we don't know about yet because they're difficult. They're the ones you have to hike for hours into the bush to find, or they're found in one tiny forest fragment. So if you add those into this overall map of our decline, and then take into account that higher extinction rate, the loss is even greater. This is an example. This is a frog that I helped describe with a team that I work with in East Africa. So we described this frog in 2017. It's new to science, but as soon as we put this frog into the world, these kinds of headlines start showing up. Newly discovered Tanzanian frog already facing extinction. That's because this is found in one small forest fragment near a major city with heavy deforestation. On this map, pink is areas with recent heavy tree loss. We haven't seen him again. He's probably gone. This is another closely related frog that we found a year ago. This one is new enough we're still in the process of giving it a name. It's also found in one tiny forest fragment. It doesn't have any protection because no one even knew it existed. Right now we have scientists trying to work on this problem, but we don't even know what we've lost before we get there, and we're losing so much as soon as we find it. Now, as a scientist, what I can do is I can add data. we can move from data deficient to a category. So these are relatives of those last two I just showed. These are all spiny-throated reed frogs. These are ones I particularly love. Initially, we thought that we had 2 to 3 species. So this is a bigger map of Tanzania, Kenya, and Malawi. After spending 10 years of work, we know that there are 8 or 9, and now we can actually know where they are. So those little red dots on the map are ranges, the tiny forests they're found in. So those 2 to 3 species are no longer least concern and data deficient. They're now endangered or threatened or declining. That's what I can do. At this point in the talk, you might be wondering what you can do. I don't expect you all to become African herpetologists, even if you're really excited by this, global threat. But there are things that you can do personally. The first thing to do is just learn about this biodiversity and learn what's happening and what's being lost. You can't do anything about it if you don't know it exists, right? So spend time with zoos, spend time with museums, and just use the internet and learn about the species alive. The second thing you can do is become citizen scientists. I use the iNaturalist app. It lets you take a picture of something you see, and it puts the location on it, and then combined with hundreds and thousands of other people, you start filling in that missing information for what is there and where is it and how many. And scientists interact with this app as well. We help sort through all this data to figure out what's there. You can also donate to conservation organizations. I'm sure there's many that you've heard of. These organizations fund scientists to go do this work. It's expensive. We need to change get that money and the scientists to where the need is. And conservation organizations really help that happen. And finally, vote. That may seem very strange. Here in North America, we are not voting for who's in charge of African and South American countries. But when you vote for your representatives here, they set the budget. They decide where the money goes. And if you tell them it's a priority for money to go to conservation and for money to move around the world, then that makes a real difference. And together, we can try to change these equations so that the critical need, the critical loss of species can be met with scientists and with data and with an active public who want to make a difference. So to wrap up this talk, you may say, that was fun, but I'm not going to do anything. You might be asking yourself, what does it hurt if I don't change anything, if I don't care? If all the frogs went extinct, would humans go extinct? No. What we know from recent studies is if frogs go extinct, the insects that they eat start to increase, and we know that the snakes and predators that eat them start to decline. But if amphibians go extinct, we are not the snakes. We will not go extinct. It's not like if all the corn crops failed at once, right? That would hurt humans. But what's at risk is our understanding of humans' role in this world. If we don't take care of the other creatures that share this earth with us, it shows a complete lack of understanding for what it takes to have a healthy world. Here in North America, where we have water treatment plants and we have monocultures of food, we can pretend that our environmental actions don't do anything. But in most of the world, people understand that we need clean water, we need clean soil, we need the plants and animals that we rely on for food and shelter. If we are not taking care of the other creatures that also need these things, then we are critically failing our ecosystem. Our ancestors almost went extinct because of forces beyond their control, and we are not so special that our future is guaranteed if we do not take care of our planet. So if you take home anything from this talk, remember that we are also little things, and if we protect our world and our creatures in the same way we want to protect ourselves, we can make a real difference. Thank you.